Well, good morning. Let's light some candles. Well, good morning and welcome to the Wednesday Pastor Check-In with Pastor Brian. That's me. Hope you're doing well. Looks like we've got a couple warm days here before we plummet cold, so I hope that you are staying warm, staying safe, and staying off the ice too, because I know we've had some icy and foggy mornings as well. So, hope you're doing well. Let us know that you're here and accounted for. We are traversing through 5 marks of a Methodist, and we are on Mark 4 this week, and I like to give a reminder of where we've been. The first character, the first mark of a Methodist was a Methodist loves God, then it was a Methodist rejoices in God, a Methodist gives thanks, and this week, a Methodist prays constantly. That's the 4th mark. And shout out to Pastor Tim, who sort of set up this topic in his Monday devotion. He and I often, or usually, don't coordinate on what we're doing devotionally. I usually make sure I'm not duplicating what he's doing. But actually, I think the way he set up prayer, and if you haven't seen his Monday devotional, you can scroll down on our page and you'll find it. The way he set up prayer and led us through a centering prayer is a perfect way to enter into this conversation about what it means for a Methodist to pray constantly. When you first hear that, you know, the other marks are a little bit more straightforward. Methodist loves God, rejoices in God, gives thanks. They're sort of characteristics. This one seems like a directive. A Methodist is praying constantly, all the time. A Methodist must be praying. And in some ways, it seems like an overwhelming and impossible task. But I love the brilliance in that character, because it reminds us that we are always seeking to be more prayerful, that we're always seeking to be more perfect in love and in our spiritual lives. And so, you know, I think we can all assume that it doesn't mean that we always should be on our knees, on our bedside praying, because we wouldn't get anything else done in the day. And in fact, I think God would say, well, if you never get up off of your knees and go out and do things, do the work of ministry, do the work of love, then you kind of miss the point. And I think therein lies some of what this kind of character gets at. You know, one of the things I love is the way this chapter starts with that guiding verse, this time from 1 Timothy 2:1. And it says, "First of all then, I ask that prayers be made for all people." One of the things I think we sometimes get confused about prayer, and I think it leads to people being unconfident in their ability to pray, is that we think there's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to prayer. And in fact, you know, Steve Harper tells a story of Larry, somebody in his church, who volunteered to be able to come to a meeting but said, I'll come, but please don't make me pray. And behind that, there was perhaps a trepidation about being the one to have to, you know, project some sense of spirituality, some heightened maturity to be able to pray with flowery words and thoughts. But when it came down to it, Steve mentions that Larry, in Larry's silence, was perhaps more powerful than any words he could have spoken. And I think that's the thing with prayer. And sometimes we also get this idea that having a prayer book, a book of common prayer, or prayers written out that somebody else wrote for us, is somehow less spiritual or less effective as a prayer. I want to make the case that in some ways it's quite the opposite. If you think back to what Pastor Tim did during his devotion on Monday, kind of guiding us through prayer, having someone lead us in prayer, that could have also been written where we'd be reading along with this sort of centering practice. There is no shame in having someone else guide you through prayer, and in fact, having the ability to sort of, not have to worry about the words that you're saying, but focusing on what you're supposed to be doing and experiencing and thinking about God, I think in many ways brings you to another level of prayer. Instead of having to think, oh, gosh, what do I say? You get to listen, you get to experience, and you get to have that communication with God. And John Wesley talks about how ultimately we go from, how does he put it? We go from regulation to relationship. That we go from sort of like trying to hit all the right marks to being in communion with God. And I think that's sort of what this praying constantly thing is about. That it helps us get from a point of, kind of feeling uptight and insecure to a place of settling in to this relationship of listening, of talking, of speaking with God. And that takes work, and that takes us practicing at it always. But the interesting thing is that there is also room in that for spontaneous prayer, for imperfect prayer, for prayers that may just be noises, prayers that may be songs, prayers that may be, unintelligible to others, but are for us and God. That is the wonderful thing about prayer, I think, is that ultimately the best prayer that you can pray is what is faithful to your heart in the way that God made you. Maybe for you, it's painting, it's art, it's crafts, it's walking. Maybe for you, it's something way different than it is for me. One of the interesting things is that Steve Harper points out is that as you look through the qualifications for a disciple, per se, in the Gospels, never does it say that a disciple must pray. Of course, we know that the disciples do pray. But Steve suggests that perhaps Jesus never explicitly saying a disciple must pray. It's leaving that flexibility and that freedom that God gives us to sing our own song, to pray in our own way, and ultimately for God to speak to us in particular, in different kinds of ways. And so I think that's ultimately Jesus' answer to our stage fright or our I don't have the right words of our prayer, because ultimately you have been given the right words. Others may not use the same words as you, but that's okay. And I hope and I pray that you don't find yourself in a setting where you are called upon to pray and you are mocked for it. I hope that we're better than that. Because ultimately, Wesley knew that praying was from the heart. And I think that's what Jesus is asking us to do in demonstrating the way that Jesus prays. Gosh, I think of the prayer where Jesus was on his knees saying, "Father, please let this cup pass me by. But not as I wilt, but as thou wilt." That story before Jesus would be taken to die, taken to the cross to be killed. Many would say how different it was for Jesus to pray like that. But yet he was praying from his heart. He was saying what was on his heart. He wasn't praying in the way that even others around him would expect him to pray. So, as you go about your prayer life, I hope you know that we are called to pray constantly. And in that, we are called to pray faithfully. Faithful to God and faithful to who God made us. You may find that you are more akin to pray spontaneously. You may find, like me, that you pray best through poetry and songs and music, and maybe with your hands on a keyboard or on a guitar. Maybe you enjoy that liturgical prayer through the Book of Common Prayer or other books we'd be happy to provide for you here at the church, or through the upper room or a devotional. Maybe you just enjoy thumbing through the scriptures and reflecting and speaking with God. Whatever that looks like for you, and in innumerable other ways, know that you are a blessing in being able to pray. Because that's how God blesses you. I'll leave that there today. There's, of course, a lot that a pastor could say about prayer, but I think having heard from two pastors this week on prayer, hopefully you have some grist for the mill of thinking about prayer and practicing prayer. As always, let me know if you have any questions or ideas, or if you want to share the way that you pray, orthodox or unorthodox. We would love to hear it, and we would love to experiment. I'm always looking for new ways to pray as well. Take care, and God bless you.